Hello, my name's Sam, you're watching my channel So Let's Sparkle with Sam, and this is my episode 4 Sewing Bee Synopsis. So if you don't want to watch, go away, catch up on BBC iPlayer, and I'll see you back here after this. So this time I'm doing things a little bit differently. Normally I put my sweepstake make snippet, if you like, at the end of the video, but today I'm going to pop it here in between this and the video. See you in a bit. Back again. So, how did you find episode 4? It is Reduce, Reuse, Recycle week, which is normally, I have to say, one of my favourite weeks. So I've called this episode, It's Like Working with R2D2. And I've done that for a few reasons. It's based on what one of the contestants said, and it made me laugh out loud. And also, it's my son's birthday this week. In fact, it was his birthday yesterday. And he is called Luke, after Star Wars Luke. I have a Luke and a Leia, in case you haven't guessed that already. I have a Luke and a Leia, and yes, I love Star Wars, and that's where the kind of sparkle comes from, because I love everything spacey. So so yeah, I thought that was an appropriate name for this week's episode. So yeah, so it is very hot here in Leamington Spa today, so I do apologise if I do stop to have little water breaks, and if the editing is a little bit wibbly wobbly as a consequence. But it is very warm, and I have to keep opening and closing the window because of noises. So again, apologies, but this is life. So yeah, reuse, reduce, recycle week, all about reusing and recycling fabrics. And I have to say, Sarah's top, so I just thought it was lovely. I'll pop a picture in so you can see it. She wore this beautiful kind of patchwork of all kind of golden colours, golds and pinks, and kind of all very light and pale colours. And I think I might make that a project for one of my up and coming vlogs, because I'd love to make some kind of patchwork garment, and I think that hers might be a good one to base it on. So I'm definitely going to be making that in the future because I loved it. I thought it was really beautiful. Apologies for keep looking down. I do have my notebooks because I have a lot to get through and I forget things. So the pattern challenge was the first challenge, and they made zero waste trousers. I'll pop a little image of what they were expected to make. And this was quite an interesting challenge as far as patterns go. I've looked into zero waste patterns before. I've actually made one zero waste top pattern. I have to say, the top fit wasn't really for me, and so I didn't kind of take it any further. But I'd definitely be interested in other kind of zero waste patterns. That one just didn't particularly work for me, and I've not been sewing very long. So yeah, it is definitely something that very much interests me, and it was a lot of maths. So some of the contestants were fine with that, some of them not so much. And Fove, right from the get-go, right from the start, she was struggling. So they had to make some trousers. She chose very floaty, lightweight fabric, and I think for the best results they needed something much more stable. She also was running a bit fly and loose with her measurements, as Patrick pointed out to her. And she ended up with one piece shorter than the other. So yeah, she didn't do very well from the start in that challenge. And then our lovely Postman Tony, he also really struggled. And I think I really empathised with Tony in this, because I think I would be a little bit like this in the Sewing Bee. You know when sometimes people say to you a little bit of knowledge is dangerous? I can be a bit like that with sewing, and I think that Tony was like, well, I know how to put inseam pockets in, but he just kind of did his own thing and didn't follow instructions and didn't think about how these were going to go in, and he just made a little bit of a pig's ear of them. I think that's the correct. Yeah, Asmaa was not impressed with Postman Tony's pockets. Not impressed at all. So yeah, overall, as I'm going to do going forward, and as I've done most weeks, in the show notes is where everyone came in every challenge. So where they were placed in each challenge, I put them. So if you're interested in kind of breaking it down even further than I do on here, then you can have a little look on there. But yeah, so yeah, Postman Tony and Fove really didn't do very well on that pattern challenge. However, top two were Asmaa and Vicki, and I have to say that Asmaa and Vicki for me are really breaking ahead as being really good in the pattern challenge. And because they're really good in the pattern challenge, they tend to be fairly good and consistent in the made to measure as challenge as well. But there was a little twist to that this week, so that was quite interesting. That was the pattern challenge. They have 3 hours to do that as well, and they all just about finished. So, challenge 2, the transformation challenge. Now this was a little bit of a strange one for me, because they had to use tote bags, old tote bags, and transform it into a garment. Great, because obviously, you know, tote bags are quite heavy, have a heavy carbon footprint. But I'm used to doing the opposite. So I quite often, people quite often give me fabric, because they know that I sew, and I'll make things from the fabric, and I quite often make tote bags because tote bags are really useful. So for example, this one was a curtain, was an old curtain, and this was just a bit of scrap from something else, a lining that I took apart. Yeah, and I make little tote bags, and I think this one's got a little matching purse that goes in it. So yeah, so the idea that these tote bags were then gonna be made into a garment rather than the other way around messed with my noggin a little bit. But it was really interesting to see what they did, and they all went about it in different ways, as they always do with the transformation challenge, and I found it really interesting. So Lizzie, I really liked Lizzie's transformation. She chose tote bags that had initials on, and so she used that as a real feature in her top. Mia, of course, went roughly, but I didn't quite get Mia's, because it didn't have to be a finish outfit. Obviously in the transformation challenge they only get 90 minutes, but it was kind of like a bikini top with extra bits, and I think it was just me. I didn't quite get where she was going with it, on what it was going to be or how you would wear it. So that wasn't my favourite. Then there was Vicky's. Now Asmaa and Patrick didn't seem to be that keen on Vicky's, and I think the reason that they stated was that they didn't like the colours that she used, and I couldn't disagree more, because I really liked Vicky's. I liked the clashing of colours. I liked the kind of dirty yellows and dirty greens and kind of, you know, mixture of patterns, and I also really liked the way that she weaved her fabrics together, and again in true Vicky style just did something a bit different. So yeah, they weren't so keen on that, but I really liked that one. Then Matthew did a kind of a very, I mean, it was a very beautiful top in the end. It looked very wearable. I wouldn't have worn it, but it did look like a very wearable top. I think Patrick described it as very Bet Lynch. So if you're from that area, hopefully you'll know what that means. And yeah, so Fauve did kind of a mix and match affair, and then Lauren she used the handles from the tote bags for binding, which I guess from a transformation challenge point of view is quite a good idea, but from a construction point of view, not so much, because the binding was so thick that it just kind of stayed away from it. It just kept pulling her garment away from the mannequin, so it didn't look very tidy and finished. And then there was Postman Tony. He did real kind of clashing panels. And then Tony W did like a ruffly bottom top. I quite enjoyed that one. I thought that one was quite different, quite nice. Asmaa did a very pretty floral and floral ruffle top, and it was really interesting because it was quite structured. She'd used the webbing on the tote bag handles, and then the ruffle underneath to kind of like pull it up. Very clever, and it did look yeah, it looked really nice. It was really effective. So she did come first. She came first in that challenge. Lizzie was second, and Lauren and Vicky were at the bottom, which I didn't really think that Vicky deserved to be there, but hey ho, I was not the judges. Let's go on to the made to measure. So for the made to measure, they had to choose, well, they had to source for themselves. They weren't sourced for them. They had to find handmade crocheted blankets. They had to be handmade. They had to be crocheted from charity shops and other various places, or if they had old ones themselves, they could reuse to make a garment. So that was the brief for the made to measure. So, and what I'm going to do is, as I go through each one, I'm going to pop a picture up so you can see how they got on. So Asmaa's was first. I'll go to Asmaa's first. She did like a flower power purple coat affair. And I have to say, it was not my favourite of Asmaa's makes overall. I really didn't, I don't know what it was that I didn't like it about it. I really didn't like it. I think it was the big blocks of colours and then the flowers. I think it was also the type of blanket that she chose. It didn't really have any interest to it. Patrick really didn't like it either. In fact, one of the comments that he made was like, even if you had extra hours and hours, it still wouldn't be a very nice dress, which I thought was a bit cutting. But yeah, I have to say, I've always thought that everything that Asmaa makes has been beautiful, but this time not so much. And I think she obviously won the first and second challenge, so she wasn't in any trouble at all. But if she'd have had a poor as 2 rounds, I think, that could have been trouble for her. And then there was Vickys Dress. Now, Vicky chose 3 blankets, one of which was her daughter's, like her eldest daughter. Someone had made it for her eldest daughter when she was born, and so she decided to sacrifice it. What a sacrifice for Sewing Bee, for her dress. And her dress is beautiful. Pop it up there. She used the kind of main blanket for the dress, and then she used a second blanket for like the edging, and then she used her daughter's blanket for the sleeves. Now, Patrick and Asmaa both didn't like the sleeves, and I felt it was kind of adding a bit of insult to injury, because the poor woman had used this beautiful present, this beautiful crochet blanket that had been gifted, for her daughter, and sacrificed it, and that's the bit they didn't like. So I was feeling a bit sorry for her. But I have to say, there was part of me that did perhaps agree with Patrick that I don't think I didn't like the sleeves. I just think it didn't need the sleeves. It would have been just as beautiful without the sleeves. So but yeah, it was just a beautiful kind of bohemian look dress, which was very pretty. Again, pictures will go up. And then Lauren's dress was a beautiful kind of autumn themed culottes and top. and I did really like this, but it was one of those ones that I liked the blanket. She made it with just one blanket, and I really liked the blanket. And I think this is how I felt about this challenge, that if I liked the blanket that they were using, then I liked their make. And I think that's why I didn't perhaps enjoy this episode as much as I have previous ones, because I don't know how I feel about this challenge with them chopping up crochet blankets to make garments. I think if, reuse anything. If something's at the end of its life and you can make new life with it, and and it is a piece of crochet or a piece of knit or whatever, then that's great. But I don't know. I think in the past, like the ones that they've done with old denim and old jeans and stuff, they've been able to be a bit more creative with. And I don't know how I felt about this one, but it is what it is. The ones that did much better were the ones that kind of knew a little bit about knitting to begin with, or kind of crochet yarn work, and so I think that was part of the challenge, is if that was your skill base, you did better. So so Lauren's was the culottes and kind of crop top. Lizzie's was really interesting and completely different, so that made it very nice. It's like a cropped bomber jacket with an oversized hood, and it was in a red blanket, so it kind of gave that little Red Riding Hood effect. And then this beautiful blanket dress. The only thing I didn't like about Lizzie's was she did some really big pleating on the dress, and obviously because crochet is quite chunky anyway, and then big box pleats, easy for me to say, didn't really do anything for it. So that was a bit that it took away from it. I really loved the bomber jacket and hood, but the box, I kept kind of honing in on them and thinking, I didn't really like those. So that was Lizzie's. And then Mia's jacket. So Mia was, I think, the only person, or maybe a couple of the others did, but we didn't see it, but Mia interfaced all of her crochet work first before she did anything else. So before she put her scissors in, she interfaced everything, and you could tell. So her finished product was much more stable, and it kind of went together very nicely. And I think it was Esme that said it was like a Chanel suit, and it was. Her crochet blanket was beautiful in the first place, and her finished jacket and skirt was divine. And I have to say, of all of them, that is the one that I would have very happily worn. Maybe not today in this heat, but it was very beautiful. Postman Tony did like a festival cropped trousers and crop top affair, which again, I could see people wearing that in festivals, with a bucket hat, and it was a very it had elasticated waist. It was really nice. And Postman Tony's poor model. So Esme was going around trying to find, all of the little things that she was finding wrong with it. And as she was pulling back the elastic to kind of obviously see how he'd stitched it together, she pinged his poor model, and you heard the snap of the elastic. I did feel quite sorry for her. I'm sure she apologised, and that model's now got a story to tell for the rest of her life. If you've been pinged by Esme Young, then I did feel a bit sorry for her. And then there was Fauve. Now, I have to say, Fauve, up until this point, hadn't had a great week, and she was struggling with this one as well. She is not a knitter, not a crocheter, not a yarny person. So I think she struggled with the whole concept of this one. but actually what she produced was really quite nice, and I really quite liked it. Again, she used nice bold colours. She used a red and a blue and a white blanket, and it was very nicely crocheted, and the finished result was very nice. So yeah, and I think she needed that as well, because she had 2 very poor challenges in the beginning. So yeah. And then there was Tony W. Tony W did like her 60s, 70s striped chevron cardigan dress combo. And he'd made a bit of a mistake on one of his, so he had to use another piece from another, so he didn't quite have the finish that he wanted. But I thought his looked quite chic, actually. It was very nice, and I didn't mind the fact that he'd changed it. It still looked very nice. And then there was Matthew. Matthew struggled with this challenge a lot, and this is where the title of this episode comes from, with that it's like working with R2D2, because in the workshop they use Janome machines. They use the 5060 machine, and I know because we use these in our workshop too. And if you break a needle, or if something goes wrong, it beeps at you, and his machine just kept beeping at him. I think he said he got through 3 broken needles, and going through all of that crochet, and then I think he put some kind of backing, and then you know, the interfacing and the wood and whatever else he had in there. His machine was not enjoying sewing, and because he made quite a few mistakes and he had to kind of rip out, it just distorted. And then at the end, I think he ended up with like this much difference on the one side of the front panel to the other side of the front panel, and it was really obvious. It was really messy. I think Patrick used the words, "It's really bad." I would have been really ashamed if he'd have said that to me, so I did feel really sorry for him. And also, it was supposed to have a bow, and he ran out of time. So I think that is the reason why. So as it turned out, it was Matthew that was going home. And although he was always very creative and bold, he just wasn't kind of technically the most brilliant. And I think that's what let him down. But I have to say, this episode did leave me quite emotional, particularly at the end. All of the contestants were holding hands, and I think it was the first week for them. It was quite difficult to see someone go. Matthew was obviously a really kind of important part of the group, and I think that week on week now it is going to be harder and harder to see them go. So yeah, that was hard. And the garment of the week went to the lovely Mia, and she totally deserved it, and she was delighted. I mean, week 4 and she's had 2 garments of the week. She was absolutely delighted. So yeah, so that is my little synopsis of what happened. It's much shorter this week because I am very hot in here, so I'm sorry if I've kind of gabbled along. So that was my week 4 synopsis for Sewing Bee. Now next week is Art Week, and I am so looking forward to. I don't think they've had an Art Week before. If they have, I don't remember it. And they're going to be making their transformation challenge. They're going to be using old canvases, so that's going to be really interesting. And then a surrealist made to measure. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I hope you're looking forward to that too. So I'm not going to share my snippet for my sweepstake because I've popped that at the beginning of the video. So I hope that you have a absolutely gorgeous week. Enjoy the sunshine. Don't forget to sparkle, and I'll see you really soon. Bye for now.